Thank you very much indeed to all of you for having me here today, the last day of 2018, and thank you for a great turnout. My name is Ross. I'm from Scotland, if you can work through this accent. I've lived here in the UAE for the last 10 years now, so this is very much home. Both of my kids were born here, and I've had the very good fortune to work with a number of different government services over the last decade here and see the most incredible transformation of what you have all been doing. So it gives me great pride and pleasure to stand here today. I currently work with GEMS as the Group Chief Digital Officer, looking after the transformation of services from the more traditional into this world of digital and in this new disruptive age. And I thought it may be worth sharing with you some reflections of what I've done with a number of the government agencies and also how we see this in terms of moving forward. So I have a few slides I'll step through, and then I think we have some time for questions at the end. So I think that the key question we were trying to ask ourselves was, how does the government create the new gold standard for 21st century services? And it has been made very clear, and there is no secret in the UAE's desire to be the number one in everything it puts its heart and soul into. There are some very obvious examples of that, whether that be you having the largest building in the world, which I'm sure tonight will put on a fabulous show, or more recently with the announcement that you now have the world's most powerful passport, which is an incredible feat with visa-free access to 167 different countries across the world. So some of your success is very visible, others is more inherent. And I think the question then begs, what does this mean for government services? In an age where we have new technologies which are changing the mechanism with which community and society interacts with government, how can we use that positively? Because the truth is, I think digital comes with some optimism and an awful lot of skepticism as well. Some people are very, very nervous about the impact of digital, of robotics, of automation. What does this mean for jobs? What does this mean for interactions with people? So how can we create experience-led innovative services? I thought maybe the best place for us to start with that is here. So when we look back through history and you talk about people being optimistic or pessimistic about the impact of technology in terms of driving society forwards, typically the economists and the historians have always been much more positive. They seem to be the glass half full members of society. The technologists now are those that are saying this time it's different. This time we are at an age where physical and digital has become so fused together that there is no turning back. So we can maybe see which side you guys fall on, whether the optimists or the pessimists. When you read headlines like this in China where they say 60,000 workers are culled from one factory and are replacing that with artificial intelligence, it does make you perhaps more pessimistic. And I always look at this glass half full, glass half empty. I would hopefully classify myself in the glass half full on this. I thought it might be worth us looking back over history over the last 200-300 years to understand how it's got us to this point. So back in the 1700s, this was the first, one of the first steam trains. This is the first industrial revolution. This changed everything because it meant that no longer were just horses required for physical manifestation of labor. And then in the second industrial revolution, we had Henry Ford perfecting the art of creating the same thing time and time again. So mass production was the second industrial revolution. And then in the 60s, this is a picture from inside the Kennedy Space Center during one of the Apollo landings. This is the advent of software. So the third industrial revolution in the 60s. The irony is the technology in this room here was 1,000th of the strength of the iPhone that you have in your pocket now. So within 40 years, we've moved from this to you having 1,000 times that power in your pocket. And this brings us on to this age of the fourth industrial revolution, where we find ourselves now with this crossover from physical and digital. And I think actually it's government services that are under perhaps the most stringent spotlight in terms of how to harness this, because ultimately society feeds and comes through government. So finding mechanisms to use this effectively is a great challenge, and I think a great opportunity as well. I think this is complicated by the speed of technology as well. And when I look here in this centre and everything that has happened in Area 2071, this is designed to capture the power of what technology is offering now. But if I was to ask you a question and say, how long did it take for these products to reach 50 million users? Well, let me ask the question. So, well, the telephone. As a Scotsman, I'm obviously very proud of our innovation. This is a Scottish innovation, the telephone, but 75 years it took us for there to be 50 million users across the world using a telephone. And then what about the radio? How long do we think for the radio to get 50 million users? Any guesses? 30 years? 20? 38 years to get 50 million people using a radio. What about the television? Okay, 20? 13 years. If we were to go down to, who remembers the iPod when it first came out? Yeah? We all had that first iPod? How long? Three years to get 50 million people using one of these. What about the iPad? 2010. So it was 18 months. 18 months for people to get 50 million on the iPad. Angry Birds? For the parents in the room, you'll know. So 35 days for us to have 50 million people using Angry Birds. And who remembers last year Pokemon Go? Yeah, you remember Pokemon Go last year? How long do you think? So 19 days to get 50 million people using Pokemon Go. I think probably 19 days for people to uninstall it from their phone as well and get bored of it. But I just thought it was a useful insight into the speed with which change is happening. And, you know, that speed of change is only going to increase. The world is hyper-connected now. And how does a government keep up with that? How do you continue to serve citizens and residents of a country when their expectation level is now, and their exposure is to a world where the virality of change around the world is so strong and only getting stronger? And this goes back throughout history. This is a picture from the early 1800s in a cotton mill in the UK. So there was a big fear that the cotton machines that were being built were replacing human jobs. And this is actually the owner of one of the cotton mills with the local militia protecting themselves from the outside from workers, because at night time they were coming in and they were trying to break the cotton mills because they felt it was taking away their jobs. But the truth is, the efficiency of those machines meant that they were able to produce more, which means they were able to bring the price down, which means they were able to sell it to more people, and the productivity went up within 1 year by 10 times with these machines. And actually, it meant that there were 4 times more jobs within this town within the year. So the initial fear of the technology was unfounded. Actually, it led to much, much greater productivity and economic enhancement. And this doesn't change. I mean, I'm not sure if any of you ever saw the film, The Imitation Game, about the machine in the Second World War to decode. This was built by a gentleman called Alan Turing, and there's a test known to this day which is called the Turing test. And the Turing test is saying if we have unintelligent human behavior and we also have intelligent behavior that humans don't do, i.e. robots, the Turing test is where in between, where you cannot tell if that is a person or whether that is a machine. And he asked the question in 1950. I proposed to consider the question, can machines think? And when we look now to the way that you are all delivering services using the likes of machine learning and AI, this is very much here now. And this is more relevant now than I think it was even 60 years ago. Even John F. Kennedy in the 60s, he said at the time, he said, I regard it as the major domestic challenge really of the 60s to maintain full employment at a time when automation is of course replacing men. I think he meant men and women, but we'll skip over his fault there. And then if we look now to the modern day, when we talk about this impact of technology in terms of how we deliver services, I thought this was incredibly interesting. People always thought for 200-300 years that automation would only affect blue-collar type jobs to drive productivity, factories, agriculture, transportation. But actually, automation is colorblind. And the biggest impact now in terms of the delivery of services, if we look down here, so these numbers are saying if 1 is the probability that something will be completely automated. Unfortunately, our accountant friends are in trouble. Telemarketeers, real estate agents, word processing, even things like commercial pilots are saying there's a 50% chance now that that is a completely automated job. And the reason is, oh, sorry. Come back. Oh, it's not going to render. So the reason is, now there is the ability to automate cognitive thinking, not just physical change. So I think what we're starting to see now is a complete change in the way that technology is changing the delivery of services. The example from this is a doctor friend, a cancer doctor, and his job is to detect early stage cancer. And some of the technology now is so incredibly specific and successful that he says there is more chance of his job being replaced as an oncologist than that of his secretary, because his job is repetitive and actually it's looking for exactly the same thing. Her job is not. It is not routine. So it is the routine jobs, even if they are cognitive jobs, it's the routine jobs that actually are under the biggest amount of pressure. And I do think this has quite a bearing on the services when we think about what it is that a lot of you deliver. The ATM, no one thinks of this as technology now, right? But when the ATM came along, banks were up in arms. I mean, the guys up here in Emirates NBD, if you come up and you take a look at, you can go and you can cash your check, you can do everything through the ATM now. And everyone thought, this is going to take away all of these jobs from these centres. And actually, between 1988 and 2004, the number of employees per branch globally fell by 35%. Because actually, people were no longer having to count out money and do it. They just changed the nature of the services that they were offering. Suddenly they were offering car loans and mortgages. They weren't just counting out the cash because the machine could do that. But what did that mean? It actually meant that the branch growth during this time exploded. They were able to serve communities that they were never able to serve before. And I see that now with the way that federal services are deployed across the UAE. No longer are they just in the heart of Abu Dhabi and in Dubai and in Sharjah. You have mobile centres that are going out into rural areas. You have the ability to extend the reach into the community in ways that you never had before. So the ATM, I think, is actually quite a revolutionary piece. This is another example. This is from one of your services. I won't mention who in the room. This is automating sales for land transactions. So these are robots working away in the background to validate sales that are coming through to put them onto the DLD database. I think this is an incredible example of how technology is being used to drive greater innovation. What used to take 45 minutes for someone to take an SPA and load that up onto the DLD site now takes 2 minutes 40 seconds. And that's being done by 20% of one robot. One other example that I thought, given Dubai's incredible infrastructure that may be interesting, is actually around the automation of cars. This is a Waymo in California. And so when we talk about automation, that's what we're talking about, not Mr. Bean with his mop trying to redirect his car. What we're talking about really is intelligent road systems. In the top left, you can see perhaps how that works. I think the days of traffic lights will start to fall away, and when cars can actually do everything that they want to do. Insurers will talk about 6 stages of automation in cars. The first is probably most of the cars that you drive are no longer like this, that are pure human. Most of you have, if you turn on your indicator, something will buzz to tell you that someone is next to you. There's already automation there. Oh, my apologies. Okay, so that's the first stage. The second is then things like adaptive cruise control. The third then is what the Teslas have, where actually there is indicative driving, where you can talk about hands off, but eyes on. This is an insurance nightmare. If you speak to the insurance companies, this is what scares them. But we are only at most 7 to 8 years away from complete full automation. In fact, every Tesla car that has been built since 2015 has the ability to be fully automated. And I think that when you look at the work that's being done by the likes of the RTA around this, there is no question that the UAE is a world leader in trying to look at automated transportation. There are also, I think, examples of what terrible experience looks like. If you go onto a website now in 2018, I think the experience often looks a little bit like this. When you log in, you get notifications coming up everywhere asking you, are you able to use this site? Are you old enough? Where do you live? Would you like our newsletter? Chatbots potting up, asking if they can help you. So I think these are examples of where I think technology has gone slightly crazy. We need to find a way of making those experiences frictionless. Perhaps the most crazy use of technology that I've seen, if you get bored and you can't sleep, is this. This is called Insomnobot. You can take the number down if you're bored. You can text it if you can't sleep at night, and you say, hi, how are you? And it's just a robot coming back to you asking questions. Probably the most useless application of technology ever, but somehow it has about 400,000 users. It's ridiculous. It's worth taking. I'll send the number out. You can take it and have a go with it. So on a slightly more serious level, I think what is interesting is when we look here, particularly within the UAE, and you look at how government services are providing to completely different industries. This is a brilliant snapshot from the guys at EY, where they've said for every dollar that has been earned over the last 40 years in hydrocarbon from oil and gas, when that $1 has been taken and has been spent in a different industry, what impact has that had economically? So as an example, for every dollar that is taken and is put back into government, it's actually produced another 1.55 dollars, which I think is incredible. In fact, over the last 30 years, the construction industry has provided back 1.86 dollars. There are some natural strengths that Dubai and the UAE has in terms of its location, and it has embraced those brilliantly around transportation, around logistics. When you look at the growth of the DP World and the guys at Jebel Ali have done, when you look at clearly what Emirates have done in terms of creating a global aviation hub, there are industries that have driven huge innovation for the country. And actually, when you plot these out and you say, what are the industries that are giving the UAE its natural strength? What are the industries where are playing to national employment? There are a sweet spot here of a number that I think are incredibly important when we think about driving innovative new government services. It plays to the natural strength of all of the sectors and the industries that you are looking to serve. So I find this to be quite an interesting insight of when we talk about government services, actually it's not really just about the government, it's about supporting the broader sector and industry in the UAE. Sorry, the feedback from this is not ideal. And I think it's clear that the government has been doubling down on experience-led innovation. When you talk about going paperless by 2021, when we talk about 25% of all transportation journeys being autonomous by 2030, I'm not sure that there's many governments around the world that have got the same level of ambition that has been demonstrated as the UAE. So I think that was it from me. I had one last video to play at the end if it'll work, because I thought it was a great example of how this area in Area 2071 is coming together. The guys at GEMS have been working closely with DFF and with different partners here in Area 2071 to see about how kids can be provided with more frictionless, experience-led innovation. And there's a new concept called Dubai Future Campus that's being rolled out next year, which is taking a traditional education and is going to employers. So around here, whether it's Pfizer, Procter & Gamble, IBM, EY, Emirates, and seeing if they can be infused together to give kids a greater experience from the age of 14, 15 moving forward, to give them true residency opportunities of learning so that they're not waiting until university or they're not waiting until their first job to actually get a flavour for that. So Dubai Future Campus is designed to do that, and I think it's the first place in the world that's really looking to do this properly.
Welcome to the future of education. Dubai Future Campus. A transformation beyond walls, timetables, and predetermined paths, where the world with all its possibilities is your campus. Through a pioneering educational ecosystem with uniquely personalized learning pathways leading into elite universities and high-end careers, we will enable and inspire the leaders, critical thinkers, and problem solvers of tomorrow. And it all starts today. Welcome to a world first, the next generation of global learning. Welcome to GXTalks.
Okay. So I just thought that was a good example of how different departments, regulators, authorities, and private enterprise are all coming together to do something that is genuinely different and better. And I would certainly encourage that to continue in terms of that level of collaboration. I think what you have built here and how you have this centre at the fulcrum of it is genuinely incredible. And I wish you all every success going into 2019. And thank you very much indeed for having me here today. Many thanks.